Hi, this is Mr. Eckert. We're going to pick up where we left off with target E4 here and finish it out. So this is part two. So another aspect that you should be aware of when we talk about evolution is something called speciation. Speciation is simply when one species becomes two different species. So how does that happen? Well, often it happens when a particular population gets separated by some kind of event. So I mentioned earlier in the first part of the topic with our target, I'm sorry, with the beetles that were separated by a river. Maybe the river dried up, then they were able to interact. So a population that gets separated by a river that perhaps then over time digs a deeper and deeper, erodes away a deeper and deeper channel, can also then separate two different species. Scientists think that's exactly what happened. When they look around the Grand Canyon, they see two different species of squirrels, what's called an ABAB or an A-bear squirrel, I'm sorry, ABERT, and a KBAB squirrel. And they look similar. They kind of have ear tufts, and they're similar in coloration. But scientists think that at one time they were one population, and then as the Colorado River started creating the Grand Canyon, the one population became separated, and they became geographically isolated. Because the conditions on the north rim of the Grand Canyon are a little bit different from the south rim, over time the two populations became more and more different from each other. Now, they're not technically two different species right now, they're subspecies, but scientists think that given enough time they could become two different species. So again, speciation is when one species branches off into two. How do you know when you have two different species? Well, if two organisms can reproduce and produce offspring that are fertile, they're considered to be members of the same species. By fertile, we mean the offspring themselves can produce more offspring. So here's an example that you're probably aware of. A horse can mate and will mate with a donkey, and you know what you get. You get a mule. Mules, however, are sterile. They cannot reproduce. If you have a male mule and you mate it with a female mule, nothing happens. You don't get any baby mules. The only way you get more baby mules is to mate another horse with another donkey. However, so that shows you have two different species there. The horse and the donkey are two separate species because they do not produce fertile offspring. However, a Labrador dog can mate with a poodle dog and produce what you know are Labradoodles. Labradoodles, a male Labradoodle can mate with a female Labradoodle, and they can produce fertile offspring. So that shows the Labrador and the poodle are actually the same species. Sexual selection. Sexual selection is something that puzzled Darwin. In fact, Charles Darwin, when he came up with his theory of natural selection, said that this was something that he couldn't explain. Natural selection didn't explain it. And here's basically one of the things that really got him thinking about this was peacocks. Male peacocks, so maybe you didn't know this, but peacocks are the males and the females are called peahens. Um, Male peacocks are the ones with the big, showy, long tails. And when Darwin saw those, they're heavy, the tails are. They're showy, so they stand out. It seemed like a disadvantage rather than an advantage because it made it harder for the peacocks to get away from predators. They had to exert more energy when they were flying because they have to fly with this big heavy tail. So by his theory of natural selection, it seems like that would be something that was selected against, not for. And yet, peacocks all over the world, they have these big showy tails. So he discovered that what was going on here was something called sexual selection, which is really two separate parts that work together. So one part of sexual selection that you need to be aware of is the female choice. So female choice means simply that the females will pick the males that they want to mate with, and usually that's based on some kind of showy ornamentation. Again, in birds, or you'll see this in fish. Male fish often have brighter colors than the females. Or in male behaviors, the male might do some kind of a courtship behavior that's very showy, and then the female will pick the male that she wants to mate with. The other part of sexual selection is the males will often compete with each other, either in displays or in actual battles where they will fight for the right to mate with females. You'll see this in elephant seals. You see it, of course, in an Ohio animal, white-tailed deer. The males will battle with each other for the right to mate with females. So male competition, then female choice are both part of sexual selection. So again, the answer to Darwin's question then, when you go back to the peacocks, why do peacocks have these big showy tails which seem like they're a disadvantage? Well, the answer was sexual selection. They have them because that's how they attract the females. Those that have the showiest tails actually attract more females and get to mate more often and pass that trait on to their offspring. In fact, there was a researcher that actually took scissors and cut some, these are called eyes, these bright spots in the tail of a peacock. She cut the eyes, several of them, out of the tail of a peacock and then watched it as it interacted with females. And it was actually chosen less often by females than other males that had tails, similar tails that had more eyes in them. So that's the answer to his question. In some species, the showiness, as you can see here in this lizard with the part of its neck is called a dewlap, which flashes towards the females. It's brightly colored. Boy, that would attract predators. Seems like a disadvantage, but it's an example of sexual selection. It actually gets to mate more often, and evolution-wise, that's that's the goal, to mate and pass your traits on to offspring. Selective pressure. Selective pressure refers to when one species causes another species to evolve, when it puts pressure on that species. So a good example, if you think of predators and prey, lions, they like to eat zebras. So as they chase them, of course, the fastest zebras are going to get away from the lions. They're going to survive to reproduce and make more baby zebras that are a little bit faster. So the lions then, the zebras are putting selective pressure on the lions to get faster. Only the faster lions will actually catch the zebras. And as they eat those and reproduce, they're going to produce baby lions that are faster. So each species is putting selective pressure simultaneously on the other to get faster. Gradualism versus punctuated equilibrium. Gradualism is the idea that most scientists, that's how they viewed the evolution of a species. They thought that this is a process that takes very, very long, millions of years. And if you graphed gradualism, so this is the change in the species on the y-axis, time on the x-axis, it's going to look like a pretty shallow curve, maybe even more shallow than this. So it's a gradual change in species over long periods of time. Punctuated equilibrium, this was a theory that Stephen Gould, you might remember him from Target 1, he was the more modern evolutionary scientist. He said that yes, this absolutely happens, gradualism. But there are instances where a species will go through rapid periods of change, rapid compared to what we think of in gradualism, and then no change at all, followed by maybe another period of rapid change. So if you graphed punctuated equilibrium, it would look more like this. Notice the slope of this curve is much, much steeper than in gradualism. Then here's the time where the organism is going through no change. Then another period of rapid change, no change. And notice that when there's no changes in the organism, the environment is relatively stable. So it's the changing environment that kind of provokes or is the impetus for the rapid change in the organism. We're going to end with genetic drift, and genetic drift is pretty simple. It's simply a change in the frequency of an allele in a population. So alleles, remember, are different forms of a gene. So you might have an allele for, going back to those beetles, a brown colored beetle versus another allele for green. And so if we actually measured in a population of beetles, let's say there's 60% of the alleles were for green and 40% were for brown. So if there's a change in that frequency, a change in that percentage, that represents genetic drift. So you can see kind of an animation of that. These different colored red and blue spheres in the containers represent the alleles. And over time, as they go through different generations, let's say you had some predators that maybe came in and we're taking some of more of one allele than another. So over time, then you started to see a change in the frequency of those alleles. You can see that you're seeing more of the blue allele in this case than the red. And so that represents genetic drift. Again, it's simply a change in the frequency of one allele in a population is all it is. And of course, as that changes, then that is an impetus or a method that evolution can come about, because once the genetic makeup changes, then the organisms themselves can experience change. So that's it for this target. If you have any questions, make sure you ask in class.